Welcome to tonight's talk. I'm Nigel Hicks, as you know, and photographer based in the southwest of England. I'm going to talk this evening about the use of photography to tell stories, as its title says, storytelling through photography. Because I thought it's quite an important subject to cover, because in a lot of photography magazines and how-to books and videos and so on, people talk about a lot about how to get the perfect images and standalone images that really sort of say wow and really hit you in the face. But nobody really talks that much about telling stories, which is a real shame, because actually one of photography's most important uses ever since it was invented really has been to tell stories about places, about people, about wildlife and so on. And it's a bit of a skill quite separate, distinct from the skills of producing standalone, one-off, fantastic photography. And so I thought I would sort of cover some of the techniques, they can call them techniques, really involved in doing that. And the best way for me to do that is really to show you images taken from a couple of my own stories. One of them, you might not be surprised to hear, is going to be about crocodiles, as you can see from the intro picture. And the other one would be about reindeer herding in the far north of Sweden. So those are the two stories I've done over the last few years. And we'll sort of look at the different ways that they were approached and how we came up with the sort of the kind of photography and hopefully a story that you can follow through the photography. So that's the plan. Start off, unfortunately, with the usual very boring bullet list. But really, this is just sort of a few points to actually help me remember really what I want to sort of say about telling stories through photography. And really that when you're telling a story with photography, you're creating a set of pictures that collectively, as a group, tell a story about a place or about an event or about some people and so on. And no single picture really stands alone. And hopefully you don't have a single picture that dominates everything and leaves everything in the shade. You need to have a group of pictures that work together and without one necessarily sort of dominating everything else. And as usual, if you're talking about a story, then you have a beginning, a middle, and an end, which sounds a little bit self-obvious, but sometimes in a collection of photos, it's not necessarily obvious at all. If you've managed to put together a story, then it should have the first messages, first images, I should say, the beginning, help to set the scene, give the environment of what it is you're talking about, what sort of the kind of event that you're going to be talking about. And then the middle part of the story, which will probably be the largest part, will give a sequence of pictures that give you an idea of what's happening or what you hope is happening or what the place is like, if it's sort of just about a particular place. And then the final couple of images will give you the end results, if there is one, or a summary about what transpired during that story that you've been telling. So the aim then is, as I say, is to produce a set of images that work together. If you don't really want sort of these great heroes that stand out beyond everything else and don't work together as a team with all the other pictures. The kind of implication of all that is that technical perfection and, as I've already said, individual spectacular standout images are actually secondary in terms of the goal that you might aim for. You're not really necessarily after those perfect images or those really spectacular standout images. The most important thing is to actually tell the story and have a set of pictures that together tell the story. Obviously, the greatest storytelling photographs of all are those that are also technically perfect and also all stand out spectacularly, but that's actually a secondary goal. So you don't always aim to achieve that, and I'll show you why in a few minutes. Finally, this is a little bit of ethics, really, I suppose, that I try to bring to the sort of storytelling in photography, is when you're doing a story, try to see it and record it impartially. Don't be judgmental, and try not to have preconceived ideas. We often have preconceived ideas before we go into a particular project, whether it be in photography or any other area of life. But when you start that photography project, try to leave those preconceived ideas at the front door, so to speak. The reason being that if you take those preconceived ideas into the project, you may then start looking for the photo opportunities that just help to confirm your bias, your prejudice, and you may well then miss other opportunities that go counter to what your preconceived ideas may be. So you should be open to just about everything that may be happening in the story, even if they're things that hadn't really occurred to you in the past, or which actually run counter to your own personal preconceived notions of what should be happening. So leave your judgments and your preconceived ideas behind when you go into a project. You may, I mean, if you want to then put a slant on the story eventually, then do that afterwards when you start editing your collection of pictures. If you want to put a slant on it, do it through the image editing after the photography, but not while you're actually doing the photography. Anyway, so let's move on to the first story that I'm going to tell you about. And the first one is some work by an organization called the Mabuaya Foundation, which is quite a small group, really, which works in the Philippines, trying to rescue the Philippine crocodile from extinction. Now, as the name implies, the Philippine crocodile lives in the Philippines, and it lives only in the Philippines, so it's endemic or unique to that country. And it's believed to be the world's most endangered crocodilian, so there's only about 100 individuals left in the wild. And the Mabuaya Foundation was formed in the early parts of the 20th century to work using what is believed to be the last sustainable wild population, which lives in some remote forest up in the far north of Luzon, which is the Philippines' main island. And what they do is they go out and they capture newly hatched crocodiles, bring them into captivity, breed them until they're about 2 years old, by which time they're large enough to fight off most predators, and then release them back into the wild in this remote forest. So that's kind of the background. I'll have to give you a little bit of background, otherwise you're not going to necessarily understand some of the photos that follow. What the story that I'm telling with the next few pictures is, firstly, this picture like this, setting the scene, giving you a shot that shows the environment. And this is sort of a typical forest environment where they live, with lakes, and also they don't live just in these lakes, but also in some of the rivers that flow off out of this forest, even quite fast-moving rivers, quite surprisingly. And so this is a kind of sort of quite wild and remote environment where they still are. And it's rather rare in the Philippines now to see something like this. So a lot of the crocodile's habitat has been lost, which is why one of the reasons why they're endangered, of course. So the Mabuaya Foundation has been working in this kind of environment to capture young crocodiles, baby crocodiles, breed them up or rear them up, and then release them back into lakes like this and some rivers as well. So this photography sets the scene, taken early in the morning with a sort of a medium lens, not particularly wide angle, a little bit wide angle, but looking along in terms of composition, looking along the lakes, leading the eye into the picture, and then hopefully your eye coming to sort of some sort of a full stop on this group of palms in the background on the right, but with the lake really being the main point of interest here. The sun is already quite high. It's actually about 8 in the morning, so it's about an hour and a half after sunrise. Of course, the sun rises very quickly in the tropics, and couldn't really get there any earlier, I have to say, because it was actually quite a long hike from our base up into the forest to get to this lake. So early-ish morning, but from the light perspective, not quite as early as we might have liked. But that's a fairly common problem I have when I'm working in places like the Philippines. So another picture sort of sets the scene a little bit. These are some of the guys from the Mabuaya Foundation. Three men who work as kind of the senior areas, and then sort of the workmen who actually work in the forest and along the rivers as well. And this is at a site, a small lake on the edge of a big protected area where they release the crocodiles. And this is here in the hands of the fellow on the left. Here is one of the 2-year-old crocodiles that are about to release into the lake. So you can see they're still quite small, but large enough to fight off most predators, hopefully. And so this is just a group picture. You might sort of show this picture either at the beginning as a sort of intro, as part of setting the scene, or at the end as kind of as a bit of a summary of the work that they've been doing. Difficult shot in this environment because we've got bright sunlight coming in from the top left, but most of these guys are in reasonable shade on the banks of the lake here. We were really short of space, so I couldn't get myself in quite the right position to photograph the whole group. I couldn't walk back far enough without either falling into the lake or being pushed against some very dense vegetation. So I was about back as far as I could get, using as wide a lens as I could use to actually try and get the whole group in, but not quite succeeding, sad to say. But anyway, it's a nice group picture anyway. So then we move on. As I say, what they do, as I said, is they rear up these little crocodiles for 2 years in captivity. They have this rearing center, which is another very attractive concrete pond. And then when they're large enough, they then release them back into the wild. The first problem you have is you've got to catch your crocodile. And on this particular day when I was there, they were going to release 3 little crocs back into the wild. And this was a really interesting thing to try to watch them do, because the crocs are really very fast. And I had to move very quickly to try and catch the photographs, because this fellow who was catching them also had to move very fast to have much chance of catching the crocodile. So there were a lot of pictures taken in this sequence and very few actually worked. So this is one of the very few that did actually come out reasonably well. We actually got quite a good composition. So going diagonally across the picture, here's sort of the main point of interest in many ways photographically, but then the net points on downwards, and hey presto, at the bottom we have a crocodile. It's rather blurred because he's moving so fast. The shutter speed on this is actually so something like 160th of a second. So he's actually moving, that croc is moving pretty fast. That's right, and it was a very gloomy day, so the ISO is actually up quite high as well, so 640. So it's quite a difficult subject to shoot. The light levels were low, everything was moving very fast, and so I had to move fast. And there you have to use a really wide-angle lens to try and get maximum depth of field, try to cover as much of the subject matter as you can, both from the point of view of the man catching the crocodiles and the crocodiles themselves, while at the same time avoiding the danger of actually being too far away from the action, so and they end up looking really too small in the frame. In this particular image, you can see I've actually managed to catch it just about right. Of course, the problem with a wide-angle shot is that you get an awful lot of background in. You can see it's pretty awful-looking background. It's really sort of detracts from the beauty of the picture, you might say. It detracts away from the simplicity. There's a lot of clutter, which is really distracting. You've got this big green box over here, and then part of a man in the background. But that's one of the things that I said about earlier about not worrying too much about technical perfection with this kind of photography. We're really trying to capture the story, and sometimes you just have to grab a shot and move on and just work very quickly to just get what you can, and which tells the story. And telling the story is more important than technical perfection. If you can get the technical perfection, then so much the better, of course, but it's not always possible. So anyway, you caught your crocodile, and there you got one angry croc being held by the man from the Mabawaya Foundation. Actually, his name is Bernard, come to think of it. And taken in, again, in flat light, or as the previous shot, it's a very gloomy day, so it's giving me quite nice, even lighting across the whole thing. So he's well lit up, and the light is very even across. There's no dark shadows and no bright highlights. As with when you're photographing wildlife or people, you focus on the eyes. So I wanted to show that crocodile, so I really make sure the camera is focused on the crocodile's face to really capture those eyes, and also show those wonderfully sharp teeth as well, of course. And I've made sure the depth of field is reasonably shallow, so the man behind holding the crocodile is actually quite blurred out. So the croc really bounces out bounces out from the background, and you're really focused on that croc there. Also deliberately cut out the man's face so that he's really so that he's not visible, because if his face were visible, then there would be competition for attention. You would, being humans, you would tend to want to look at your human face, so you would be distracted away from the crocodile face, and also with the lens focusing on the crocodile, his face would be blurred, which would be quite distracting, quite not very satisfactory or very satisfying for anybody looking at the picture. So best to crop out the head altogether, so that then there's no competition for attention, and your eyes go straight to the crocodile's head. And that's sort of how you capture attention there. So then moving on, once you've got your crocodiles, before you release it, you've got to find out all you can about that croc. Or in this instance, on this evening, 3 crocodiles. Here we go. So taking all the sort of the vital statistics, length, weight, etc., and just that was all had to be recorded, and this was a great thing about photographing it all here. I should actually add here that the people at the Mabelwire Foundation were really keen for me to be involved in this photography. And so that's why I'm able to come in really close and be involved with them. I was with them for several days, and I was really able to be closely involved with the sort of work they were doing with these 3 crocodiles leading up to their release. And so it was great to actually have their cooperation, so I could actually get in there, get whatever shots needed. They would pose and hold the crocodiles every now and then if necessary, so that we all work together really quite nicely, which is not always necessarily the case, of course. This fella here is obviously not Filipino. He's actually he's Joey Brown, who was a crocodile expert at that time from Oklahoma State University, who was working with the Mabelwire Foundation on funding from the National Geographic Society. He now runs a zoo in Jamaica, or you see the crocodile part of the zoo in Jamaica anyway. So I see his Facebook posts from time to time about dealing with crocodiles in that country. But here we are anyway. So from the photography point of view, using a very wide angle lens in order to get all the action going in, and obviously coming in quite close as well to actually give us a good strong angle, so it's a little bit quite energetic. Sense of dynamism there really shows up the beauty of the wonderful tablecloth we have here, and really give us a big depth of field so we can see all the people involved, and all quite sharply in focus as well. Even the people just loafing around in the background are reasonably sharp. So again, this is actually taken in the evening now, so light levels are pretty low, so that the light is flat. And so again, getting nice even illumination across everything. No flashes involved. I didn't use a flash at all doing this, just using the illumination that's there from the natural light. So you might wonder what's all these tools there are for. Well, next shot coming in still with a very wide angle lens, again 19mm, but coming in really, really close to show the detail of the work going on here, as well as Joey's face and the people in the background, and big depth of field, and even closer detail of the beauty of this wonderful tablecloth. What he's trying to do here is actually find out what sex this crocodile is. Apparently it's not very easy at all to tell what sex a crocodile is, but this is what he has to do, is probe around in the cloaca, which is an opening in the abdomen of a crocodile where you see a lot of reptiles where the sex organs are, and he has to sort of try to find around, poke around to try to find what it is. So, and this was actually turned out to be a male. This is, so what have we got here? Wide angle lens, quite a big, quite a narrow lens aperture, f13 I see here, and the ISO of 400. So giving a big depth of field all the way from the skin of the crocodile here through the hands, which are nicely sharp, and then all the way to the background here, so we can really see the work going on, and with nice flat even illumination. Once you've done that, the next step is to fit a radio tracker to the crocodile's back, and that's what we're doing here. So just coming in reasonably close to show this. It's a slightly wide angle lens, but wanted to come in fairly close but stay back a little bit without, so it wouldn't actually get in their way, take their light or whatever. But try and show what they're doing. You can see that the crocodile's skin is perfectly sharp, but the tracker itself is a bit blurred, as are the fingers, which kind of indicates that Joey here, trying to fit the transmitter, is moving quite quickly. He's got a lot of hand action there, finger action, trying to fit the strap on the back of the crocodile. But again, nice even illumination, which shows up everything as a little bit blurred, but that's kind of what you expect when someone is working hard. The next picture is the work completed, and then coming in close, using a short telephoto lens, and it says 88mm here on my sheet. So coming close to show both the radio tracker and the way it's fitted. As you can see, it's just a leather strap around the crocodile's pelvis, so shouldn't cause any discomfort, shouldn't or pain, and shouldn't hinder the crocodile's movement at all, and will transmit its signals back to base and show the scientists exactly where the crocodile is going, or what it's well, not necessarily what it's doing, but where it's going once it's been released. Obviously, eventually all this falls apart and the tracker falls off the crocodile, and completely free of it. It is not stuck there all its life while it grows. So that's a nice detailed shot. Obviously, depth of field is pretty small. You can see the hand already is going out of focus here. it's f10, so it should have a fairly big depth of field, but it's not, because as the camera comes in closer to the subject, so your depth of field gets really very small. But you can see we've got nice sharpness here on the strap and on the radio tracker, and then up here it starts to get blur out, but sharpness is all around here where you actually really need it, and then falling away and further away, so you don't have to, your attention is focused on the tracker and the strap that's around it. Okay, so then the next picture shows transportation from the rearing center, which is down more or less in the lowlands and away from the sort of the forest, and then having to use a big truck to then carry both the team and these 3 little crocodiles up into the forest, or to the edge of the forest anyway. And this is the transportation we used. It has to be a really big, sturdy lorry, because the road to get into the forest was absolutely dreadful. I mean, it really in very poor state. There is actually a video of this journey on my YouTube page, showing some parts of this trip, and it was really bouncing around quite a lot. So anyway, wanted to really highlight the truck again. My usual thing of coming in quite low, and we use with a wide angle lens. This is, again, is 19mm to really emphasize the size of the lorry and really get the whole lorry in, and also show the team climbing aboard as well. So really set the scene for actually moving off up to travel for almost a whole day up into the forest. A clear blue sky, or almost clear, but nevertheless photographed while the sun is actually behind the clouds. So we've actually got quite even flat light across the lorry, across the subject matter. The one problem we do have is that because of that, the clouds are actually, or the sky is actually much brighter than down here around the lorry. So some of the clouds are starting to burn out. So that's not quite so as successful as we might have liked, but that to say, again, technical perfection is of a secondary concern to actually telling the story. So then next shot, suddenly we're there, we're actually at the release site. Obviously this story, I'm not showing you all the pictures. There isn't time to show you the entire sequence of pictures, so I'm skipping along here, just showing sort of some of the most significant shots. And what you see here is these orange tubes of what was used to transport the 3 crocodiles, so 1 croc in each tube. And so that enabled them to stay in the dark, so they would stay a little bit calmer, and also help to cushion them from any bouncing around that the lorry might have done during the journey. And here we have a shot of one of the Mabuaya staff pulling the crocodile rather unceremoniously out of the tube. This is another instant where I had to move very quickly, because he pulled the croc out very quickly, very unceremoniously, so I only got a chance to get a shot very briefly. And this is a usual example of, you don't have time to mess around trying to make sure you got everything perfect and got absolutely the right lighting and right perfect composition, even the perfect focusing. Sometimes you just have to get in the best position you can and just shoot away quickly before they've actually completed the action that you want to photograph. In terms of lighting, well, the background is quite bright. There is some sunlight there, but this fella here is sort of standing more or less in the shade. So we've got nice flat even lighting across him. A little bit brighter out here to see the sky is burned out, but it's not too bad. The actual picture, the story part of the picture, which is the most important part, of course, has worked reasonably well. Using a very wide angle lens, because firstly I wanted to come in close, and also I wanted to show the environment in which the crocodile is going to be released. Then following hot on for that one is the actual shot where he's got the crocodile out, and that's it. They're ready to go, more or less. Note the tape around the snout there to stop it taking a chunk out of anybody's hand. Needless to say, the tape is taken off before the croc is released. So someone has to risk having their fingers bitten when they take the tape off. But again, wide angle lens, 19mm. You see more clearly here now in the background here on this other side of the lake. The sun is shining quite brightly, and the sky is very bright, but this man is standing more or less in shade, and the crocodile is in shade. So we've got nice even lighting over these 2 individuals, but it's not, although it's very bright in the background, it's not, the contrast range is not too great. Post photography processing has helped to overcome any problems that there might have been with the background being much brighter than the foreground, but overall it's not too bad anyway. And then we have one shot of the crocodile almost ready to go. This is an example of, again, a wide angle shot. If you think of the earlier picture shortly after the crocodile had been caught in the breeding centre when they didn't have the tape on. I came in close to the crocodile and had the man really blurred out completely. Well, this time I shot with a wide angle lens, so I can show the crocodile and the man. Everything is sharp. The croc's sharp, he is sharp, and even the background is reasonably sharp. It's a bit blurred, but it really shows the background vegetation around the sides of the lake, and really shows up the crocodile ready for release. This is a little bit more problematic with the lighting, in that the light is coming in very strongly from top left, and so the crocodile is in bright sunlight. Bernard's t-shirt is partly in sunlight. His face is sheltered by the hat, which is actually quite a good thing, actually, because it's put nice flat even lighting across him, and actually the lighting across the crocodile is also fairly even. It's just an awful lot brighter, so there's a little bit of a contrast range there to deal with, but it's not been too severe. It's worked out reasonably well. All right, then one final close-up of the crocodile before he's released, before the tape is taken off, and so showing just the head. It's actually taken with a moderately wide-angle lens, or 36mm, so slightly wide, but with a very narrow lens aperture, f16. So depth of field ought to be quite big, but the reason the background is completely blurred is because, of course, I've come in very close to the crocodile, and so the depth of field is very small. Even though the lens aperture is very narrow, the depth of field is really small, so the background is completely blurred. And you can see that the focus is going out already just when we reach this man's sleeve. It's already lost its sharpness, but all this area is completely sharp, which is what we want, just to really home in on this crocodile's eye and his face, and just sort of the last phase really before this croc gets released into the water. And then at last, the finale, the croc is released. You see the tape has been taken off his snout, by the way, just to reassure you. And we have this really great picture of a crocodile being released back into the wild to help boost the numbers of this hugely endangered species. Photographically, it's wide angle lens, it's 19mm, because I wanted to show not just the man and the crocodile, but also the lake behind. So I want to really show the environment. The lighting is a complete nightmare because we've got really bright sunlight on the vegetation over here. Sun is coming in almost straight down from the top of the picture, and the man and the croc are partially in shade of dappled lighting, which is always a bit of a problem. But again, its post-photography processing has helped to reduce the contrast range there, so we managed to keep everything reasonably under control. In terms of my positioning for the picture, you can see I'm actually raised up above this man. I'm standing on the bank of the lake. Ideally, I probably should have stepped down into the water and got down at his level and photographed them together, so they've been much closer together. The problem with that position would have been, well, apart from me getting my feet wet, but also would have had very bright vegetation immediately behind this man's head, so he would have been in sort of fairly darkish dappled light, whereas a bright sunlight immediately behind, and it would have been, might have been a little bit of a problem with the trying to get the composition to stand out. Whereas in this position, at least, he has sort of just a fairly simple backdrop of water behind him, so he's completely clear. So we've got the main subject here, and then a nice view going into the background of the lake. And then a final summary afterward here is the crocodile swam off very fast to get away from us humans, but then a few minutes later, much to our delight, resurfaced to blow a few bubbles and to say goodbye to us, and then and swim off into the wild. So a big boost to the well, 3 crocodiles, so almost pretty much a 3% increase in the wild crocodile population that day, which is not at all insignificant. Hopefully they will by now be adult crocodiles, and hopefully adding to the future population of the crocodiles in this forest area. Obviously, when you're photographing this animal, he's actually quite some way out in the lake, so shooting with a long telephoto lens. Is a 300mm lens. You don't really get to choose the composition very much, other than where you position him in the frame. You really would hope that the crocodile might turn around and face us a little bit, but was not to be, just looking at the back of his head, but that's pretty good. And all you really want to focus on is just the top of the head here, which is not as easy as it might have sounded, because he's on the move all the time and he's dipping his head up up and down, partly a few seconds above the water, then down below the water. So it's not as easy to get the focus correct on that head, but that was the goal, and that's what we managed to achieve. And we got a really nice finale, nice summary shot of this crocodile now gone from captivity to freedom in the lake, this lake on the edge of this great protected area in the far north of the Philippines. So that's kind of the end of the first story I wanted to show you. It's a nice, strong tropical story, and it's of conservation, of breeding and release to try and bolster the wild population. Next one is very, very different. Still nature and still natural environment, but in many ways even wilder, but wilder for different reasons. So this is Lapland's autumn reindeer roundup. This is in an area called Laponia, which is up in the far north of Sweden, inside the Arctic Circle. And it's as you can see, it's a truly wild area. And each autumn, round about now, actually, the local Sami people, or the Lapps, herd the reindeer down off the mountain areas down into lowlands, where they then corral them temporarily in order to temporarily round up those reindeer that were born that summer, so they could be marked for ownership, and also round up some of the males, which are then killed for meat for the winter. So they have round them up, firstly to bring them down to lower pastures to survive the winter, and secondly then to literally earmark the youngsters for ownership, and cull some of the male animals for meat. So I was really privileged to be able to go and photograph the corralling part of the roundup. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get to photograph the reindeer being brought down off the mountains, but I did get to photograph the corralling and the rounding up of the animals in the corral. This is an example of a situation where I didn't have cooperation from the local people. I had their permission to be there, but that was as far as the cooperation went. So I was really having to sort of be very much the fly on the wall, really trying to grab what I could as the action went on around me. And it was quite thrilling and exciting, and hopefully we'll show that some of that in the pictures to follow. First of all, setting the scene, as I described earlier, just a couple of landscape shots. This really shows sort of the wildness of Laponia, which is it's a huge area up in the far north of Sweden, inside the Arctic Circle. It includes 4 national parks, but the Laponia itself is a World Heritage Site, encompassing those 4 national parks, running up towards the border with Norway. And this orange-brown colour is actually mostly conifer trees in autumn colours, and some larches as well, but mostly conifers in autumn colours. Conifers, larches are a conifer, of course, but so it's mostly larches in autumn colours, and then you'll see some greens, which I'll talk about in a moment. This and the next shot, which I'm going to show you, is you see the greens here. This is actually not moss or grass or anything. It's actually lichen, and this is what the reindeer feed on during the summer months. So this is the environment they inhabit during the summer. But this is now second half of September, and it's already starting to snow up here, so the reindeer have already been brought down off these higher areas. So this, as you can see, is taken from quite high up. This is taken from a helicopter. So the Laponia management people were really kind enough to lend me a helicopter for an hour, so I could get to these remoter corners and photograph the real wildness of this situation and landscape. And actually, so. You and I, we would call this a wilderness, but my Sami guide, who was with me for a couple of days, rather balked at that term. He said, "This is not a wilderness." I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "This is home." So this is an example of one's perception. Don't go in with your own preconceived ideas, because they herd reindeer up here, and the reindeer, it's a little bit like the situation with ponies on Dartmoor or Exmoor or in the New Forest, is that we kind of often think of them as wild, but they're not wild at all. They're actually owned by people, and they're left to sort of do their own thing for much of the year for the summer. But then every autumn they're brought down to lower pastures, and then they're rounded up, some are killed, and so on. And they're all owned, although they move around in mass herds. reindeer within the herds are owned by different Sami families and so on. So that's kind of the background to this whole thing. And it's going to hopefully move on and show you a few pictures that really capture the corralling and the roundup. So you're in a situation where you're in the middle of a corral surrounded by 5,000 slightly panicked reindeer, and it's a little bit high octane. And this shot doesn't do quite justice. It looks very static and very calm and stable, which in some ways would sort of sum up kind of a Swedish scene. But actually, those reindeer are all on the move and are not terribly happy with having so many people all around them. But anyway, these are the Sami people who are looking out for newborn reindeer that might be following a mother that they own, so they can then catch that reindeer and mark the newborn reindeer for their ownership, and also looking for some males that they can round up to have for meat. So photographically, you can see I'm actually in a raised position here. So I'm actually sitting on the side of a wooden fence on part of the corral, so I'm actually above the melee of it all, shooting across using a telephoto lens. This is, I think, let me see what it says. Yeah, well, it's a 175mm lens, handheld, of course, with all this stuff. It's all handheld, 250th of a second. So it's just focusing really on more or less on this reindeer here. So the men in the background doing the work are kind of going out of focus. So I'm really sort of showing the reindeer herd as much as anything, with the men just as a background item sort of in the scene. And then something similar, sort of coming in much closer on just a small number of reindeers, is just a 200mm lens. So here I've actually left the fence and I've gone in among the reindeer to really home in on just a few. First of all, the collar, of course, really indicates ownership, so just to show that these reindeer are not actually wild. They're sort of like domesticated, well, not actually sort of farm animals, but ones that are left sort of roaming out in the wilds for much of the year. And so telephoto lens just homing in on, well, just this one reindeer here with lots of others all around, and backlit. It's not silhouetted, of course, but it is backlit, and that enables the sunlight to really pick out the edges of the antlers, and really, so you really got this beautiful golden light around, really showing up the velvet on these newly growing antlers as the autumn approaches. One of the things about reindeer, if you don't know, is that both the males and females have antlers with reindeer, not unlike all other species of deer where only the males have antlers. Both sexes have them in reindeer, and that's because the antlers, especially the front bit here, are used to dig into the snow to reach grass and lichens below the snow. But anyway, so that's sort of a backlit shot, telephoto, just homing in on one particular deer, but with crowds of others all around. The next shot illustrates the struggle really to lasso some young reindeer to actually then mark them up. And actually, it's not so much the struggle to lasso them, but the struggle to photograph the lassoing. Now, I took many pictures of these Sami people trying to lasso the reindeer, and hardly any of them came out. This is not an ideal composition. There were many things I would, ideally do about this, to change the composition of this picture. But it's one of those situations where you shoot what you can. You need a picture that tells the story, and this certainly tells the story. And it's quite unique in the sense that, not unique, but it's successful in the sense that both the man is sharp, the reindeer is sharp, and even the lasso, the line that the lasso is on, even that is sharp, and you can clearly see the lasso going around the head of this young reindeer here. It's a shame that we've got just the bums of the reindeer as they try to flee from this man, but that's kind of in the nature of the beast, if you excuse the pun. But it's one of the few compositions that actually worked reasonably well. It was very hard to photograph this because, firstly, I'm working at reasonable distance from these people. I don't want to get in their way as they're trying to catch these deer, and also, of course, the deer that are being lassoed tend to get into a bit of a panic, so I don't want to get in the way of them. So I'm shooting with a telephoto lens, and so covering very small areas, but I have very little idea of exactly where a lasso is going to be thrown next. So I'm sort of moving around, pointing the camera in different directions all the time. So most of the pictures don't work, because by the time I've actually pinpointed where a lasso is about to go and then got the camera to focus on the action, it's all happened, and don't get time to press the shutter before everything moves out of focus again, or the action's all over. So anyway, so that's a shot that kind of worked, not the ideal composition, but it does tell the story and captures a moment in time. The other thing, of course, is once you've lassoed your reindeer, then usually you end up wrestling it to the ground for whatever reason whatever you want to do with it next. And you see that women are involved in this work as well. Another shot taken with a telephoto lens. Again, I can't really get in too close to what these people are doing because the reindeer, of course, not surprisingly, not terribly happy about this kind of treatment. It's a 200mm lens with a fairly narrow depth of field. You see all the reindeer in the background are completely blurred out, so both the woman and the reindeer pop out of the background, and you really sort of home in on what's going on here. The reindeer's head is slightly blurred because of the action, the way it's moving, but the woman is sharp, and much of the reindeer itself is reasonably sharp as well. And then we move in. This is on a little bit of action here, or static action, you might say. Two men literally earmarking a newborn reindeer, not newborn as in the sense of actually this moment, but newborn as in born this summer. And they really literally earmarked and they cut notches in the ears. Every family that owns a reindeer has different patterns to cut into the ears of patterns of notches to cut into the deer's ears. And so that's what I'm trying to photograph here. I'm at a reasonable distance here. Actually, it's a 200mm lens again, so I'm keeping a reasonable distance. There are actually, however, in this sequence, shots where I have come in very close to these two men, and really showing them, just homing in on the knife cutting the ears. But I did originally put it into the show, but I thought perhaps I'd take it out because it's quite a bloody picture, and I don't know how sensitive some people might be about seeing this kind of shot of the ear actually being cut. Naturally, these people do claim that cutting the ear like this is quite painless, but it doesn't really look painless, and it certainly produces quite a bit of blood. I'm sure the reindeer would have something to say about it, but it seems to heal perfectly well, and the reindeer don't seem to be suffer too much from it. Anyway, photographically, there's a 200mm lens, quite a nice bit of sunlight coming onto these fellas now, but not really sunlight that disrupts the composition of the picture. The hand is a bit too bright, but it's not really too bad. And again, the background is completely blurred, so that the reindeer, although we can see that there are a lot of reindeer in the background, they are not distracting. They're just actually there setting the scene quite nicely. And then coming on to more action, this is sort of this scene of trying to catch a few big males, mostly fairly young males, but males that will then be slaughtered for winter meat. And this obviously is a much more physical activity than catching the very young reindeer for earmarking. And this was again a very difficult thing to photograph because it seemed to happen so quickly. Once they've lassoed a reindeer, then these men would take hold of the reindeer and pull them aside very, very quickly. And it was, again, very hard to predict where it was going to happen. So again, you're really shooting on the hoof, moving very quickly, trying to avoid action elsewhere, and just trying to home in on what you've managed to see, sort of hopefully not too far away. Again, it's all shot with telephoto lenses. Well, actually, this is shot with a fairly short telephoto lens, only 70mm. So I'm reasonably close into this action here. Problems with lighting, of course. We've got strong sun lighting coming in from the left, which is lighting up these men quite nicely. The reindeer, of course, is left in shadow, which is a little bit disappointing. But nevertheless, you see the action. There's quite a lot of action going on there, and it really captures sort of the mood of what's happening here. This man behind here, you see he's got another line of his own, so he's hauling on another reindeer, which is out of shot. So it's but this action didn't last very long. I didn't get very many shots in this sequence. It's all over very quickly. Not the slaughter, but then moving in to this kind of situation where each reindeer they've captured is then tied up to a post for later movement elsewhere. So that's again a very difficult thing to shoot in the sense that it all happens very quickly. You have to move. You're really shooting from the hoof very quickly, shooting as quickly as you can, trying to make your compositions work as best you can. And this one has worked reasonably well. I could improve the composition if I had time. Obviously, you can see that firstly I'm standing up, so I'm shooting down at them a little bit. In my usual personal position would be to crouch down to actually increase the apparent size of what's going on. the problem with that is then I'd be shooting against this very bright sky behind them, so that behind was causing disruption to the overall composition, so I didn't do that. Also, I can't really see the face of the reindeer very well. It would have been better if I'd gone around the other side and shot from the other side, because you can see there's nobody over there. But then the problem would have been that I would have been, by the time I got round there, the action probably would have been over and I would have probably lost the shot. So that's, again, moving very quickly to try and get a few shots as you move quickly, just what shots that just tell the story, that may not be technically perfect and may not be the ideal composition that you might really want to have. Anyway, you see both men and women involved in this work. It's actually quite a family affair. You see this young child, he didn't actually get involved in the work as such, but the children are there. It's very much family work involved. He's there, he's going to learn the trade in the next few years. So again, it's shot with a telephoto lens, 159mm, just focusing on him, so just to capture his face and his enjoyment of the scene, with the reindeer in the background perfectly, well, not perfectly, but largely out of focus, but nevertheless there, setting the scene. The sky is very bright. Couldn't control that at the time because having to shoot quite quickly again. That's all happening, all going on all around me, and just grabbing moments here and there as best I could. But as I say, it is a family affair, and then when all the work is done, it's time for a picnic. You can see this is actually in September, so we're having sort of nice balmy temperatures, still in t-shirts and so on, at least I am. And but this September in the Arctic Circle, it's getting pretty darn cold, but you still have a picnic. So this is taken with a wide-angle lens. These people, this is actually a family that I was there. I've been invited to be there as a result of a friend I have who lives in the area, who's not Sami. She's sort of normal, we say normal Swedish, and so this is a family that knew her very well. So I was invited in with the picnic. So that worked quite nicely from a photographic point of view. And the nice thing I always like is that people just completely ignore me, and I just shoot away at what's going on, just in this sort of little domestic scene outside the corral, just after a lot of the work has been done. And then finally, as a kind of a summary to the picture, to the story, you would, of course, as part of the picnic, take along your pet albino reindeer, who is, in this instance, is called Smiron. So this was a really nice little composition. This here is actually my Swedish friend, but this is the a Sami woman who is the owner of this wonderful reindeer. And I did actually see a number of albino reindeer that day, and they all had these huge antlers. So anyway, really nice. I like this composition. I like the story it tells almost by itself. Coming in, actually, it's a 55mm lens, so just a standard angle view, but with a sort of not exactly a straight line, but a little bit of a triangle, with the reindeer sort of center of action, you might say, and the people interacting with each other, ignoring me, but looking into each other. So therefore, we're looking into the picture and looking at in towards the reindeer. That's kind of the summary to the story. I wasn't allowed to really go and photograph the next stage, which of course is the slaughter of those males, which would be sort of the conclusion to this story. Probably wouldn't be a particularly pretty sight. So I wasn't too worried. I wasn't too concerned about not being allowed to photograph that part of the story. But that's so we end up with finish off instead with a nice happy picture of a pet reindeer, which of course we all have at home stashed away somewhere. So that's the end of the story. Just final thing, the usual thing about what's on the website at the moment, of course, all about the workshops coming up this autumn. We've got 5 one-day workshops this autumn, all running through October and the first week of November. There's also the usual videos of the past online talks. So this one will join them in a few days, a week. That's all at nigelhicks.com. The next talk is about macro photography on the 20th of October. I know I've talked about macro photography before as part of wildlife photography. Well, I'm visiting the subject again because I'm hoping to sort of include a lot of other non-wildlife close-up photography that you might do of stuff that's not alive, stuff that's not sentient. So just close-ups of patterns of rock or of wood and steel and so on. So just general detailed close-up photography. And then there's the other thing, reminder about the other website, aquaterrapublishing.co.uk, with the books and prints that are on that site. And that reminds me actually to say about one other thing. These 3 books, Beautiful Cornwall, Beautiful Somerset, and Beautiful Devon, Unfortunately, the prices are having to go up at the beginning of October. 1st of October, the prices will go up from $9.99 to $10.99. Everything is becoming more expensive at the moment, so the books are going to have to go the same way, sadly. While Southwest will stay the same price, $14.99, but all these the margins on these 3 books are very small. So as soon as the prices of everything else goes up, then so does these have to too. So anyway, that really is it's the end of the talk. What I'll do is I'll stop sharing my screen. If anybody wants to ask any questions, then please do so. Obviously, unmute your microphone. If you can turn on your camera if you want to, but if you do, then you may well be visible in the recording of this talk, which goes online next week. Okay, so if anybody has any questions you'd like to ask, just fire away. If you want to unmute your microphones first. Mark, hi.
Hi, that's Mark. I always got a question, haven't I? So going back to that reindeer with the highlight around their antlers, was that deliberate or was it just what happened? You know, you had the frame of the antlers, yeah?
Sure.
Was that aimed at, or did it just happen because of what happened when you pressed the shutter?
No, I could see it with my eye that it was there, that the light was just right to achieve that. So obviously, when you're surrounded by 5,000 reindeer, there's all sorts of possible compositions, and none of them quite works for you perfectly. So, but you pick out the ones that are the best that you can see, and obviously ones where they're backlit and you've got this lovely white glow around the velvet on the antlers. That's got to be a sort of a bit of a no-brainer, really. A lot of other compositions don't work half as well, but that one did, I should say.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. Anybody else? Okay, so if nobody else has a question, then I will close the meeting, and we'll say I hope to see you in a month, just over a month, on the 20th of October for a macro photography talk. Meanwhile, have a great autumn, and obviously if you want to come on a photography course that's coming up in October and November, then by all means sign up. There's spaces on all the courses, and I'd love to hear from you. And so talk to you again soon. Thanks very much. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nigel.
Bye. Bye-bye.